there, football fans, and welcome to another edition of the SumerSports Show. Lindsay Rhodes here, excited to bring you the 4th episode of our Sticky Stats series, the first of which focused on quarterbacks. Then came the running backs, and then we talked about wide receivers last week, and now we are moving to the trenches, taking on the big men and talking offensive linemen. And I am so excited to tell you who I will be talking to, because normally, of course, it is Sam Brockhouse, data scientist extraordinaire, but he's off this week, enjoying a much-deserved vacation. And so in his place, we have 2 guests. One that will be representing the data arm of Sumer Sports, and one that will be representing the football and scouting arm, the latter of which is growing almost daily. We hired 5 new people on that side just yesterday. Our guest today has been with Sumer a little bit longer than that, with 37 years of NFL coaching experience for several different teams. You might remember him from Hard Knocks 2018 with the Browns. Fan of zoology, not a fan of stretching, Maserati driving, offensive line coach, Bob Wylie.
Hello there. Oh.
Can we get a set hut?
Set hut?
I love it. The best. The best. Bob, you are a legend. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about O-line evaluation. I'm also looking forward to hearing what our other guest has to say about a frankly very tricky subject matter, and that is O-line stats. Adam Vonder Haar is the SumerSports Senior Director of Football Analytics, and he worked with the Cowboys before he came here. Thank you so much for being with us, Adam.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I mean, obviously very excited to hear from Coach Wylie, and big shoes to fill stepping in for Sammy B, but glad to be here.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, we called you in from the bullpen with the bases loaded and no outs. This is a tough one within the Sticky Stats series for a number of reasons. Most notably, there aren't many stats that are about O-line play. And frankly, the ones that people associate Adam with O-line play the most are incredibly misleading.
Yeah, definitely so. And that's why I'm so thankful to have Coach Wylie here too, because this has historically been something that is very difficult to quantify statistically. It's not like quarterbacks and receivers where you have these really defined outcomes on a play. And even for the outcomes we do have, such as sacks, they're often kind of misattributed to the big men. They get blamed a lot for stuff that may not necessarily be their fault. So I'm excited to dive into that a little more and explore that.
Bob, what do you think about that? Us just banging the table for a few minutes about the fact that sacks are not an offensive line stat.
Well, I believe that wholeheartedly because I coach the position. You know what I mean? And everything we do, okay, we get blamed for everything. It doesn't matter what it is out there. You know, we have a logo, okay, it's like a secret society called the Mushroom Society, okay, because, and it's called a cool society because it's coaches of offensive linemen, right? And because we're always left in the dark and they always feed us crap, and that's how we grow. You know, if they may change the backside at 300 protection coming through the tunnel going to the game field, you know, and I said, why don't you guys just wait until Monday and tell us, you know, after the game? It's so we're, you know, we get blamed for everything and we're always the last guys to know what we're supposed to do. So that just goes with the position. You just kind of let it roll off your back and keep on going. So,
have you ever had an offensive line that you thought was misevaluated in the public? Like, are there any examples that come to your mind?
Yeah, it's not so much just for the whole year. You may get just one game, and one game you have a bad game. Everybody has bad games. There's nobody that doesn't have a bad game. You know, whether it's the whole offense, a whole defense, a whole team, you know what I mean, or just one player, everybody's going to have a bad game. Okay? You know, so when they have that bad game, you may go to 5 or 6 sacks, and then they're saying, "Oh, the offensive line's it's terrible. They're so bad." You know, but I had those 5, 6, 7 sacks. You know, 2 of them may be the running back, 1 may be the wide receiver, another one may be the quarterback holding the ball, another one, you know, the tight end doesn't block his guy, you know, and then all of a sudden, but they were going to put it on the offensive line. So, yeah, I've had games where we've given up, you know, some sacks, don't get me wrong, but we may have given up 2 out of the 7 or 3 out of the 7.
Yeah.
Right. And then they're hammering us. But the offensive line's not playing well today. A great example, okay, had a right guard at the Chicago Bears, okay? Wonderful player, wonderful player, really played a long time, 12 years plus in the National Football League. We're playing the Green Bay Packers, okay? And we're going down the field to win the game. We get a 2-minute drive. So we get into the red zone, into the tight red zone, okay? And a kid gives up a pressure, okay? Or a sack. Kid give up a sack, right? He hadn't given one up all game. You know what I mean? He's got the fewest amount of sacks on the whole offensive line for the whole year, okay? And they made that kid in the media, right, so bad.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about the other 68 plays that he played that were good?
Yep.
You know what I mean? You got 68 good ones, you get one bad one, but that's what they know you for.
Yeah, this is such a weird position in football and frankly in sports, because usually in sports you want people saying your name. That means you did something good. This is the opposite. Like if you have done your job really well, they're probably never saying your name. So it's an inverted kind of pyramid in that sense. Adam, it's funny. It's funny that you, Bob, just mentioned a Chicago Bear, because Chicago Bears are the prime example for me last year with regards to the sack story. So they gave up, Caleb was sacked 68 times. That was the most in the NFL last year.
Yeah.
I counted 37 sacks that were specifically credited to an offensive lineman. That means 31 of their 68 sacks, nearly half of them were attributed to somebody else from a blame standpoint, right? Like, so that's one example of we spend years saying, oh, Bears offensive line, Bear got to make, get better players. And like, it's possible the players that were on the offensive line weren't really the problem, right?
Totally. Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously, offensive linemen are a part of the story of sacks. There are certainly situations where an offensive lineman blows a block and it gets through and the quarterback has no time and he gets sacked. And so we know that those happen. So it's not to say that O linemen are completely blameless, but there's also so many other factors. There's scheme factors at play that, like Coach Wylie said, how long a quarterback holds the ball. Did the running back pick up his protection? Did the receiver run the wrong route and kind of throw the quarterback off? All those things are factors. And this is actually a finding that we found repeated in the analytics community several times when people have looked into this. When you look at sack rate for a team particularly, and you look at when a quarterback changes to a new team, that sack rate stat tends to follow the quarterback much more than it stays with that offensive line. And so that's a little bit of signal for us that when you're looking at pure number of sacks or even sack rate, when you're looking at teams season to season and looking for that stickiness, it isn't super sticky, especially on teams where the quarterback changes. It tends to be more sticky to the quarterback because quarterbacks are a lot responsible for that. The way that they hold on to the ball too long. Caleb Williams is an example of that at times. And so those are all of those factors that kind of muddy the water on sacks. And we don't want the big men to get all the blame for sacks. Occasionally it is kind of their fault. They might blow a block. But to your point and to Coach Wylie's point, we definitely want to take all that context into account into what could contribute to a sack.
All right.
Yeah,
So
in the record book, it doesn't say. In the record book, it just gives you the number.
Yep. Well, we're trying to change the record book here, Bob. That's the point, right? Like, because we can, there's a traditional box score that we've always followed, and maybe we can move in a direction where some different stats are added to that box score so that we can better judge all of these positions. And that is the point of the Sticky Stats series. Say that a few times fast. Okay, so sacks we've talked about. I would assume that pressures, all of those types of stats kind of track in the same way, right? Hits, hurries, and total pressures all kind of fit under the same umbrella of the way that we've described sacks so far, correct?
I would say yes, so, but in my opinion, pressures have a little bit more signal because there's you want to judge process over outcome as much as possible. So sometimes when an offensive lineman is giving up a potential sack, he's giving up a pressure, but the quarterback is still able to get rid of the ball, he throws it away or something like that. You still want to kind of like capture that the O-lineman might have missed in that way. And so pressures are a little bit more signal because you get more of that kind of initial, what is the process of what's happening, even if the sack doesn't end up converting. So pressures, I would say, are better than sacks, but even still, they have a lot of these same issues that we talked about with sacks.
Bob, I know you probably didn't spend a lot of time looking at box scores or stats or anything like that in your time, but if I handed you a sheet of paper that said all of your offensive linemen's pressures, hits, hurries, sacks, which one would your eye go to first?
My eyes would go to the sacks, because they're definitive. I mean, you've lost the yardage, okay? It's 2nd and 18 now, okay? You're not, and what Adam was talking about with the pressure, the quarterback has a chance. There's a chance and a pressure where he can slide, make the guy miss, step up in the pocket, get away from it, throw the ball into the dirt, throw it to that little old lady that sits in the stands with the gray hair to watch her grandson play. Throw it to the, she's at every game, and it's throw it to that person. You know what I mean? Just, and so that I would, pressures are less definitive. Okay.
Aren't they more indicative though of the process, like Adam was saying? Because like you as a coach, you're judging, like, did you do your job on this play?
Exactly.
And then what's the outcome of the play? And the two sometimes are different, right?
Right. The kid missed this block. He didn't do technically what he was supposed to do. The guy gets to the quarterback, okay? And then the pressure, the guy almost gets to the quarterback, so there's that fine line. Yeah, technically what the kid did, what the player did was wrong, okay? Or the defender was better than him in that play, okay? Right? And so, yeah, the process that the kid went through, right, whether it was a pressure or a sack, he doesn't know that until he turns around and looks. There are quarterbacks on the ground with the ball in his hand, or the quarterback, or the ball's gone, okay, and then the offensive lineman goes, you know what I mean? We'll play the next play. That's about what happens.
Okay, so sacks, pressures, QB hits, all of those types of stats require context, right? They are not necessarily about the offensive line, but they can be about the offensive line. Are there any other stats that you have found that you think, Adam, we probably think about the offensive line but might be misleading?
Yeah, I think yards before contact is one that I think is interesting, and it's not all bad. It definitely has some signal there too that if and this is something you have to chart really specifically. It's not captured in probably regular box score stats typically because it's very specific on a play-by-play basis. But that isn't always attributable to the O-line either. Just like we don't want to give them blame for things that aren't their fault, you don't always want to give them credit either when you have a particular running back who has very good vision, very good speed, is able to get into space. Again, the context matters there too. There's certainly situations where the offensive line is creating that space for the running back, and that's great. And we should always take that into account. So it is one that is decent, but I think is maybe a little bit overused and giving too much credit to the offensive line at times.
That's a fair point. And I feel like just largely because there are so few offensive line related stats, that's one that I have kind of gone to look for whether or not I always say, Bob, all of these stats require context, right? So these are just this is the beacon of light that tells you kind of where to look and start investigating further. But in terms of yards before contact, a few years back, Deion Jackson had a really low yards before contact. He started the season as the running back for the Colts a couple years back. And I remember that number being very, very low. And I thought, oh, offensive line. And I, in my head, kind of made that an offensive line stat. And then he was replaced a couple of games into the season by Zach Moss. And that number went way up. And so that was probably the first time for me as a specific example, Adam, where I went, oh, maybe this isn't about the offensive line because the offensive line didn't change, but the running back did. And that number changed dramatically. So I think vision is an interesting one that you pointed to there. In terms of yards before contact, coach, what would you be looking for in terms of the goal, I guess, for your offensive line?
Yards before contact?
Yep.
You're trying to cover up defenders and move defenders. You know what I mean? And it really doesn't matter which way you're taking them because you're caught on a running back that's going to read the defender, his read spot, and it's going to take him to where the open hole is. You know what I mean? The only reason the ball moves, on a football field is because somebody didn't do their job. It's the only reason the ball moves. So somebody doesn't cover the A gap, okay, the ball jumps in the A gap and he gets some yards. You know what I mean? Or they're in the A gap and now he's got to go in the B gap and he gets in the B gap and, somebody didn't do their job. The ball's moving. It may move. It may go forward. It may go sideways. It may go backwards, but it's going somewhere. Okay. You know what I mean? So us, when we start the block, we want to cover defenders up and stay on the guy, right? As long as we can so the running back doesn't see any color. Okay, running backs run away from colors. They don't read offensive blocks. They see a different color and they run away from it. It's just their instinct. If they run to it, then you get another running back. Okay? Because it's simple. We really don't. You look at it, yards per, I know before contact. When I'm coaching it, I'm really not coaching that. I don't say, hey, we need to give the back, you know what I mean, so many yards before he gets hit. We don't do that. It's tough to measure when you're a player. Okay, I gave him 3 yards and then he got, that was great for me. No, you can't. There's too many other things to think about. There's way too many other things to think about. So when you're coaching it, okay, you're not using that. Okay. That's a stat that would be a stat for the fans. You know what I mean?
I think most are. I think that it's probably fair to say that most are, right? Because you're evaluating different things. And so the stats for the most part are for the fans to understand what happened. Like you understand it on a different level. You are the context, right? That we will never have. But we have to find ways for people on the outside to better understand what actually happened.
You were saying it earlier, Lindsay, that you change backs, right? And then all of a sudden it goes way up. Okay. I don't know. You remember Barry Sanders, right? Oh, you guys remember Barry Sanders who played for the Detroit Lions. Sometimes you don't block anybody and Barry runs for 60 yards. You see that in a lot of games. You miss a block.
His yards before contact is like 40.
You miss a block or you miss a double team or you do something like that. But the back makes the guy miss. He keeps going. Now, yards before contact. How do you take care of that, Adam? Right? It's a guy standing in a hole. The running back makes him completely miss. Okay? Yards before contact. It's great.
No, and I want to double down on this because it's an excellent point. And as the stats guy, as the data nerd on this show right now, I'm someone that totally gets that stats are the best we can do to approximate the way deeper knowledge and context that a coach would have. A coach is not going to come to a player and say, hey, your yards before contact is too low. Like you're going to coach the assignments that you want him to do, and you're going to evaluate the film and make sure he's doing that. You're going to look at body positioning and all these things that, obviously are the most relevant things to pay attention to. From the outside looking in, we don't always know what those assignments look at. From the data side, we don't know his body positioning right now, at least. And how to measure that. So we're trying to just like take this kind of very broad brush at getting whatever signal we can out of what's happening on the field and trying to contextualize it as best we can, knowing that it's very limited. And that's what we're looking for in these sticky stats. Which stats are not doing a good job at that are like, putting way too much blame on the offensive lineman, and which ones might be a little bit better at just kind of inching us towards more context, but knowing that is going to be a limitation of stats in general.
I would even argue too, just in the example that I gave about Zach Moss and Deion Jackson, in that specific example, it kind of told us something about both Deion Jackson and Zach Moss that I would never have known without being in those meetings or watching them in practice, which is that Zach Moss is better at one specific thing than Deion Jackson, right? Like you can kind of start to deduce a few things. Same environment, your yards before contact is a bigger number than Deion's. And so why? What is that? What does that tell you about the running back in this case and not the offensive line? Because now that the number has changed in an environment that has remained the same outside of the running back, now we know in that case it's about the running back, right? So Yeah, I think that this is funny throwing stats at you because I know that you're not using any of these stats. But I do want to get to a point in the show a little bit later, and where we can maybe create some stats, because that's the cool thing about working at a place like Sumer that has all of this advanced technology, and we're moving in a direction where we can really measure a lot of things that have been very hard to measure for a really long time. So I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of, in a perfect world, what you would like to see measured in a tangible way. But first, though, there are a few stats. I don't know that stats is the right way to say it, Adam, but like, what should we be looking at if these numbers that we've talked about already don't necessarily tell us the whole story? What can we look at to get a better idea of what's happening?
Sure. So there's a lot of people who have made some attempts at this, and they're kind of varying degrees of success. But I will say a couple things that are common across all of these different attempts at some more advanced, newer stats. One, and Coach Wylie touched on this later, that they're trying to grade the specific assignment of a particular offensive lineman. Not just did a sack occur on a play, but did that particular lineman give up a block or blow his block or give up a sack or not hold his the pass rusher for a certain amount of time. All those things are attributable to that specific lineman, which is a better signal than just judging the offensive line as a whole. And those need to be either charted with a human charter watching all the linemen to kind of make the note of, okay, he blew this block, or with tracking data. And you can kind of judge this a little bit. You know, you can see the locations of all the players, and is the pass rusher on the other side of the lineman? That's probably a sign that he's gotten beat, and that's not a good thing. So that's kind of a commonality. The other piece of this is kind of a time threshold. So when a quarterback gets sacked 4 seconds into the play, that's probably not the offensive line. Even the best offensive linemen are not going to be able to just hold back the defense for that long. And so if you have a stat that specifically constrains the judgment to the first second of a player, first 2.5 seconds, which is really common, it kind of average time for a quarterback to get the ball out, then you can start to attribute more of that to the offensive line itself. So ESPN's pass block win rate does a great job at this. Sports Info Solutions has blown block percentage. We have some attempts from the Sumer side as well that I think will come out at some point. And so, but they had this kind of commonality of trying to judge the offensive linemen specifically with some sort of charting element and kind of constraining that to a specific time window that we think they're more responsible for earlier in the play.
The time that we need to hold, it's different. Defensive line coaches or defensive coordinators, they chart how quickly the quarterback gets rid of the ball. Right. And that's going to determine, kind of like Belichick. Okay. At New England, they charting how fast the quarterback gets rid of the ball. And then in the game plan, it's going to determine if they're going to blitz or not. Or in the game plan, sometimes some teams will decide, hey, we're not going to play a 34 defense. We'll play with 4 down guys. Okay. Or so the release of the quarterback getting rid of the ball is, determines sometimes how the defense is going to play. If the quarterback's getting rid of the ball in 2.3 seconds, they're probably not going to get a lot of blitzes. They're going to try just to see if schematically you've got it covered. Okay, but the chances of them getting there are really low. The quarterback's getting rid of the ball in 2.7, 2.8. The higher that number goes, right, the more likely you're going to have a problem somewhere up front. Okay, it's going to be distributed to that guy. Okay, so we can gauge, because of all the technology we have, when the ball's snapped, okay, how fast does that guy get rid of the ball? And then when he does release the ball, where is your guy when the ball is released from the quarterback's hands? It doesn't matter at that point in time what technique we're using. It really doesn't. Because the whole thing comes down to production. The whole thing, right, Adam, comes down to can the guy produce? Okay, it's not always going to be pretty. Okay, it's going to get ugly at times. But he's going to have enough tenacity to keep that guy off of the quarterback. Okay, so when you get to that point in time and the ball is released, you stop the video and you say, "Where's your guy? Where is your guy in relationship when that ball is gone? Did you do your job? Period. Did you do your job? Forget all the stats and stuff. Okay, when that ball goes, okay, where is your guy? And that's the only thing that really matters. It's the production of the player. Okay, did he keep that guy from getting to that guy over there? Period. Done. Okay, so we look at, hey, they get rid of the ball in 2.5 seconds. We get rid of the ball in 2.3. Tom Brady was great at it. Tom Brady got sacked. Okay, because he got rid of the ball so quickly and he knew where it had to go. He knew protections, he knew where the ball had to go, and he knew how fast he needed to get rid of it. Okay.
That's one of my favorite kind of next level quarterback things to track is their time to throw versus their time to pressure. So, because then it's kind of telling you a story of like you have a general sense for how much time you have, and you're not putting yourself in a position to hold on to the ball longer than you should, right? Before there are defenders in your face, and there are only a handful of people that are right side up in that department. Baker was one that jumped out at me a lot this season that really kind of turned me onto this stat as maybe being one that we should start tracking a little bit more kind of in an in your face way. Cause I think there's some tell there. That's about a quarterback as opposed, well, it's kind of how the quarterback works with the offensive line, which sort of goes back to the whole story, right? Like Caleb is the example that I used in the beginning about their sack and pressure rate for the Bears versus the actual number of sacks that were attributed to their offensive line. They also popped in terms of time to pressure. They had the 9th longest time to pressure in the entire NFL. So their quarterbacks had the 9th most time to throw than anyone else. Like all of this, like I hate that this is all coming back to Caleb as a Trojan, but to me, these all point to the fact that like a lot of these O-line and backfield situations that we talked about last year are more about Caleb, right, than the offensive line in Chicago. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I think you especially see this with young quarterbacks when they're making that transition from college to the NFL because they're a little more tentative releasing that ball than they're used to. They're not used to the speed of defensive secondaries that you see in the NFL. And so they're just a little more hesitant. And it takes them a while to develop the confidence of someone like Tom Brady, who had been doing this long enough and is able to get that ball out. Sometimes coaches can scheme around that. You can run more quick game and, certain plays designed to get the ball out quickly versus if you have more play action where it's going to develop a little more slowly on purpose. They're kind of looking up from that and then it's just a little more tentative because they haven't developed that confidence yet in the pocket to be able to still make that throw. And so they hold on to the ball a little longer and that really stresses the offensive line. So I think young quarterbacks are a really common example where you start to see some of that.
What really stresses the offensive line is not knowing where that guy's going to be. We're blocking a spot, right? And he's not on that spot. And you can't, you don't have eyes in the back of your head. And all of a sudden, the guy that you're responsible for takes off and goes, what is he going that way for? Because the ball is going that way. That's what you get a lot of young quarterbacks that do that. And they don't want to make mistakes. What happens? They're afraid to fail. That's what happens. You get afraid to fail, so you're not going to play at the highest level that you need to play at because you're afraid to make mistakes. There's going to be, when I first get the guys, I try to tell them there's going to be sacks, guys. You're going to load up sacks. There's going to be pressures. There's going to be quarterback hits. That's going to happen. Do I coach it? No. Do we want it to happen? No. Do you guys want it to happen? No, we don't. But it's part of the game. It's going to happen. You know what I mean? So how do you deal with it after it happens? That's what's important. Okay.
Mm-hmm. How long into a season, especially when you haven't had continuity from year to year, like you're not working with Tom Brady, season after season after season, but if you have some turnover at quarterback, how long does it take into a year before an offensive line really has a good feel for what they're going to do in that pocket in a way that can help them do their job better?
Well, they can learn that, relatively quickly. Coming through training camp, coming through the preseason games, okay, they can really get a feel for the guy and how fast the ball's getting out and if he's staying where he needs to be. It doesn't have to be a long process to go through the whole season. They'll figure it out relatively quickly because they don't want to look bad. Okay, they don't want to look bad in front of millions of people. Okay, so the process that we deal with the quarterbacks is we get the quarterback and the offensive line together. Like 7:30 in the morning, or sometimes 7 o'clock, right? And we go over the protections, and if it's not the whole line, it's at least the center. Okay, and we make sure that the quarterback and the center are on the same page with the protections and where the weakness in the protections are versus the blitzes that we're going to see that week. They need to be on the same page. You know what I mean? And, we come to the line of scrimmage and we're going to point out, who we want a mic to be. Okay. And the quarterback has the right to trumpet. He goes, no, I want that guy. Like Tom Brady used to do the whole thing. He'd come to the line of scrimmage, he'd point to Mike, I want that guy to Mike. Because he could see the whole field.
Mm-hmm.
Young quarterback, you were saying young quarterbacks holding the ball. There's a lot of reasons. They get, number one, they don't want to make a mistake. They're afraid to fail, but they also get confused sometimes because the coverages in the National Football League are probably a lot different than the coverages that they see, okay, in college football.
It's so many of the things that you've said and Adam have said have pointed me, and like my brain keeps going to the ways that environment is different for all offensive linemen in ways that are really hard to track across the board. Like if you were blocking for a rushing quarterback, you might actually like maybe some different offensive linemen might succeed in that environment more so than in an environment where they're blocking for a pure pocket passer, right? Like you might have more success in that situation, just different skill sets, different strengths and weaknesses from an offensive lineman. Also, you're talking about how, how quickly your offense might get the ball out. Like the Dolphins have a very quick passing attack. I don't know how much of that is specifically to or how much of it is just what they want to do offensively, but you're blocking for less time. So that's a different situation. We're evaluating you in a different set of circumstances than most teams in the league are. Then there are guys that are, let's say you're an offensive lineman in the AFC North, and you are going to face Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson and TJ Watt twice a year. Like those guys are really good. They're supposed to win some of the time. And so they're going to get theirs by the end of the season. And so if you're an offensive lineman that's facing that caliber of pass rusher, then your numbers just might be a little bit higher, but there's no way to contextualize. Like they gave up more pressures and sacks this year than this other guy did, but it's okay because they did that against good guys. Like we don't have a way of tracking whether or not it was okay and still a quality set. You're shaking your head like that's not okay.
No, because you put the game plan together, when I was coaching, you had Reggie White and you had, Richard Dent and you had Bruce Smith. And so I go into the game, I made sure that we had a plan to handle that guy because he could change the game on you. So whether we slid to him, put the tight end over there, had the tight end hit him before he released, we had to back chip him. But there's a plan of how we're going to handle that guy. If you think you're going to put your tackle, if your tackle is good enough that can block him one-on-one, okay, yeah, that's great. That's a bonus because now you can do other things with the protections, okay? If your tackle can't, then you, as a coach, better put that kid in the best possible or put the offense in the best possible situation. But we're going to handle that guy first. Whatever we need to do, like we had a protection years ago when we played the Packers, this is way in the back, and we call it nickel 92. I think Reggie's White, whose number was 92. And so you go find 92, okay? And you guys hit, whoever the free guy is, go find 92 and hit that guy. So that's a little simplifying it. But you better do that as a coach, okay, or as a coordinator, because, I'm not very smart, but the quarterbacks can't throw the ball far down the field when they lie on their backs.
That's hard to do.
Ball doesn't go that far down the field when they're lying on their backs.
I feel like Anthony Richardson's trying to test that theory, but that's, where's your brain going as we're in this part of the conversation, Adam?
Yeah, so I love that answer from Coach Wylie because I do think, we've hinted at this several times, but so much of how you should judge offensive linemen is relative to what they've been asked to do. And when they're asked to do, go against some of the best defensive linemen in the NFL without a lot of help, without a lot of game plan that is accounting for that, then you shouldn't judge them quite so harshly. But when you have situations, and we're trying to do this more and more with play-by-play data, where you can take into account that a tight end came in and had a chip block before he released for his route, and he still gave, and the tackle still gave up a sack. Even with that help, then you judge him a lot more harshly. When that didn't happen, then you want to be more fair to him. So taking into account as much of that context as you can is important. And coaches can have a big impact on that and how they game plan and how they schematically adjust for the challenges the defense is going to pose, the specific players that are going to have a big impact, and put the offensive lineman in the best position to succeed.
And the play caller has a big part to play in it because you want to, one of the things you say, you want to keep the defense in a conflict of assignment. You want to put that guy in a conflict of assignment and he's not sure if it's a run, if it's a pass, but he's not sure. And so you got to move the quarterback. It may be a run action pass, and it's a play action pass, and it's out of pocket pass, and then it's a 3-step drop, 5-step, and maybe a half roll. Move the guy around so you don't put the target on his chest. Or don't let him go back and drop 12 times in the same spot. I don't care who you are. You're going to get your butt beat. It's going to happen, okay? I don't know which one of those 12 it's going to be, but it's going to happen.
So Bob, let me ask you this then. Let's say that you're an offensive line coach and you have a weak link and you're looking to upgrade that weak link. And your front office has pulled you in. Where do they start looking if they're looking for an upgrade? Outside, is it just someone has scouted all of the other offensive linemen in the league? Because you also are not going to have the context of every play call and everything. You in that situation are sort of looking at these offensive linemen and evaluating them the same way we are on the outside. So how do you go find the best offensive linemen to come in? What are some of the things that you would be looking for that would tell you this guy is the right guy versus that guy is not going to get this done?
Well, it's production. What is the kid's production number,
So which numbers would tell you that? Which ones are the ones that you would say, go look at these production numbers? Because I think that might point us in the right direction.
Would be how he grades out, okay? So when I grade a player, right, there's a lot of things that go into it, okay? But to make it simplistic, I give him a run grade and I give him a pass grade. And there's a total grade. The total grade is for the guys on the other side of the building. You know what I mean? That they're going to, he graded out 86% for the season. You need to give him another $2 million. That's that side of the building. I don't get involved with that. Okay? But I'm involved in the run grade and the pass grade. It's just going to tell me the percentage, right, of how many blocks that he made. Okay? And now I need to know if I have to work with that kid more in the run game, or do I need to work with that kid more in the pass game? How many sacks, how many practice, how many missed assignments, how many quarterback hits. I got one thing in there, it's called NOS, not our standard. That's not how we play, guys. That's not our standard. That's not what we do, okay? So I got to compile all that information in my own little head, and we get sheets that kind of look like this. Well, when you're done, I don't know if you can see that, okay? But it has all the information of what that kid did for the whole season, okay? So now I got to know, okay, the left guard, right, he's not playing really well. When you got to replace him, during the season, who do you have to replace him? Is the backup better than he is? Do I need to bring a guy from developmental up, or do we need to try to trade before the trade deadline with somebody else on another team to bring another guy in? There's another process that takes place in that, okay? And then if the scouting department, the guys that do pro personnel, they'll have all those guys graded. They'll have all those guys with numbers and say, hey, this is the best guy that's available. Take a look at it. What do you think? Okay, and then you got to make a decision. Yeah, he's better than what we have. But the problem occurs too is that when you bring a new guy in, he doesn't know the system.
Yeah.
Now you got to teach him the system. So now there's another, angle that you got to approach it by, because he's going to make mistakes because he doesn't know. Sometimes they'll in the huddle and you call a play, and I'm worried if he knows it's a run or a pass. I think, what I mean? So you got to go through that learning curve with him when you first get him, and you got to spend a lot of time with that guy. I usually get the guy, okay, and I get him what my assistant take him, teach him the offense, okay, teach him the line calls, get him ready before you give him back to me, okay. And that's really what happens because, as the line, I don't have enough time. I got so many things to do.
Yep.
You've been around the line, guys. You see them, they work forever. They're first guys in, last guys out. Okay, they bury themselves into turning over every stone, not to get any negative yardage plays, run or pass. You don't want negative, plays. At least get the ball back to the line of scrimmage. Get the ball back to the line of scrimmage. Give us a 2nd and 10 instead of a 2nd and 8. 2nd and 18. We'll deal with 2nd and 10 because the philosophy that you have, and you may want to figure this into, Adam, when you do some stuff. What's your philosophy in offense? Okay. A lot of the offenses, you want to live in the world of 3rd and 4 to 6. That's where you want to live. To live in the world of 3rd and 1 to 2 is unrealistic. Okay. You don't want to be in the world of 7 plus. Okay. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You don't want to be in that world. So if you can get in the world of 3rd and 4 to 6, how do you do that? Okay. Well, if you run the ball and you get back to the line of scrimmage, okay, now it's 2nd and 10. If you want to throw it again and you get in 3rd and 6, where you want to be, you're going to make more of those than you are the 3rd and 7s, okay, in the 3rd and. So you want to get in that world. If you run the ball on the first down and you just made 2 yards, and you all of a sudden over the headset you hear, "Oh, we're not blocking anybody. We only gained 2 yards. Oh, what's the matter with those guys?" And you guys don't hear what happens on the headsets. They write a whole book on what happens on the headsets. And, so we got 2 yards, right, Adam? What's 2 yards? 2nd and 8. If you run the ball again and make another 2 yards, you're in 3rd and 6. You're where you want to be. If you make 2.5 yards, well, you're in 3rd and 5. Excuse me, does that make sense? You got to get into that world. What's your offensive philosophy? So you can keep the ball moving. All right. So that's all has to be filtered in somewhere, I think. Get the ball. What you want the first stat? How many? What the team with the fewest negative yards? Who's that?
I do think what he's hitting on here, which is really important, is what stats you look for, and depends on what kind of offensive lineman you need, and that is really important for what is your offensive philosophy in the first place. If you're doing a lot of run concepts that need a guard that pulls really quickly, like you would focus more on that. If you are a pass heavy offense or play action heavy where you need to give more time, you might focus on guys that can hold those blocks for a little bit longer. And so, looking for this, one size fits all stat, that's what we kind of found with sacks, that sacks compress too much information into a single number, and you miss a lot of the signal you need. A lot of times it just depends on the situation you're in and what type of gap you're trying to fill. You noted this, Lindsay, but offensive lines are a weak link system. That is a tough one to say because your weakest point is going to expose the quarterback. And so sometimes it's understanding where those weak links are and how you can fill those either with scheme adjustments or paying attention to the relevant stats that are closest to what you're trying to measure for the type of guy you need to bring in.
When I grade players, I just don't give them a plus and a minus. This makes sense, Adam. Like if they've done the job correctly, they'll get a plus. They use the right technique to block that guy. That guy doesn't make the play. He gets a plus. Okay. Right. The next one, he blocks this guy, but he uses the wrong technique. He crosses too far, one hand's too high, whatever. But he blocked this guy. This guy didn't make the play. I give him a plus and a minus on the same play. You see what I'm going with this?
Process poor, results good.
Right. Then if he doesn't block his guy and his guy makes the tackle or makes the play, right, then I give him a minus. Right. And if he gives up a pressure, he gets a double minus, sack, double minus. You know what I mean? Penalty, double minus. Okay. And so I'm evaluating the efficiency, the production of the guy. I give him a technical grade because I got to make him better. So technically, how do I got to grade him? And then I give him an assignment grade. Did he do the right assignment? Did he go to the right guy? Right? Because that missed assignments get you beat faster than any other thing, faster than sacks, faster than, whatever else you got. Missed assignments get you beat faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not giving the running back a chance. You're not giving a quarterback a chance. You're not giving them a chance. Okay, now they may make the guy miss, but it's hard. Okay. So missed assignments, that's another grade you give them.
Yeah.
Okay? Penalties are going to happen. That's part of the game. But the stupid penalties, once you jump offside, you miss the snap count, that's just looking like an idiot. That's bad. Okay. You know what I mean? But sometimes you want to get an aggressive penalty. You may get a holding call. Okay, sometimes the holding call is a guy who's going to kill the quarterback and you grab him and hold him. I can understand that. You don't want to, that guy's getting paid a lot of money to stand back there and throw that ball. You got to keep him upright. You know what I mean? So I kind of trade it. Technically, I got to make you better. You get this grade. Assignment-wise, I need to know. Walter Camp wrote a book in 1891. Walter Camp, this is American football. Walter Camp is the father of American football. 1891 in the book. I got a copy over here on my shelf. Okay. I got the original copy from 1891. Okay. And it says in there's a direct correlation between intelligence and winning football games. There's a direct correlation between that. Okay. And in other words, he's saying you can't win with stupid players or coaches. Okay. You can't do it. It's really tough.
Yeah.
Right. They figured that out in 1891. They don't have it figured out today.
That's the truth.
100 plus years later, okay, but the statistically, what we started here about sacks, everything belongs to the offensive line in the sack game, okay? All those statistics mean something to somebody, okay? They mean something to somebody. You give it to us. And I say, okay, Adam, he's going to come in. He's going to give me all these different statistics that he has about the offensive lineman. And I got to say, yeah, that one fits that. I need to know that. They don't need to know that, but I need to know that.
Yep.
Okay. What you don't tell them is just as important as what you do tell them. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to know, when I'm giving them too much stuff and just shut up. Okay. And let them use their athletic ability and go play. How much passion do they have? How much, tenacity do they have? What do they need to keep that guy from getting to that guy? Which is, now you give me the statistical information that I can use that'll help me, take to work with that kid to stop the defender from getting to that guy.
So I think you hit on a really interesting thing there as a theme of this episode, which is that maybe in this position more than even others, all of the stats are necessary because they tell you different things. And what I'm learning is that different things are relevant to different players. So in this case, it's not a one size fits all stat. It's all of these stats are valuable, and you just need to know, unfortunately, for those of us on the outside, which players each stat is most relevant for, which ones tell the story. And you have to be willing to kind of dig a little bit deeper and look under the rock. In the interest of time, there are two more things that I just want to hit here before we wrap things up. And one is that we've talked a lot about pass blocking, I think, stats that are related to that with the pressure and the sack and even time to pressure and all that kind of stuff. Not really so much about run blocking, though I suppose yards before contact kind of check that box. Is run blocking tougher for us to measure, Adam?
I think so. I mean, the run game in general is a lot more variable than the pass game. There's a lot of different run concepts that could be a part of your kind of offensive identity that kind of muddy that water a little bit.
Oh, like screens? Like what
yeah.
are we like what do you even put a screen under?
Yeah, so I mean, screens are one that, in theory are a pass play, but for the offensive lineman, Coach Wylie could probably speak this way better than me, but you tend to want to like maybe consider it a little bit more of their run blocking ability because they're trying to get downfield, they're trying to get to space and kind of move the defense a little bit so that after the screen, the running back can get in space. So yeah, I think you tend to want to treat that a little more like a run, even if it is technically a pass play. So all of those things kind of muddy the water of run blocking.
That was one coach that we found that kind of popped when we were looking at some Quinn Miners, the tracking data, like and like run blocking stuff was a little bit lower than we had expected, and so we kind of dug into that and found that because we were putting screens in a pass blocking situation, and that's such a big part of their specific offense, that it was a smaller sample size that we're looking at in terms of pure run blocking. And so it kind of skews all of that stuff. So what would you do with screens? Where would you put that if you had to put it in a run block or pass block bucket?
In other words, it depends what type of screen it is.
Okay.
Right? There's so many different types of screens, right, Adam? You got the quick screens where the ball gets out there. Well, that's like running a sweep. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting the ball outside the numbers. You're getting out there someplace in space. Let the kid work. Uses athletic ability out there. Okay. But then you got the slow screens. When you get the slow screens, you're actually blocking the protection. You call a protection, okay, in the screen. Like we call 84 Roy. That's just what terms I'm used to using. Okay. And we're going to run 84 protection, but Roy tells us it's a screen to the right. It's a slow screen. So we block the protection. Okay. And then it gets out. It's tough to put that in a run game. Okay. Because we're actually blocking the protection. Okay. Right. The other screens, okay, you can kind of put them in the run game. Okay. Because you're faking a run. He pulls the ball and he throws it to the receiver. Okay. You know what I mean? And the receiver's on his own. Or he's got the ball. They snap the ball to him and then he throws it right to that guy. And the offensive line's pulling as fast as they can to get out. They don't even block the guy in front of them. They just get out there. They kind of set and get out, go. Get back in the ocean. Go that way. Okay. And so, you put those kind of in the run pot because the ball's getting out of perimeter so fast. Does that make sense so what kind of screen is it? What are you trying to do with the ball? Where's the ball going? Nobody really knows where the ball's going that way. And that didn't happen. Okay. So I put the quick screens in some type of one kind of deal, but the slow screens would be more on a pass kind of stuff. Guys, I don't know if you see it that way, Adam, or not.
Yeah. No, that's totally right. And I think we keep hitting on this, but that context is really relevant. You can't just say all pass plays go in this category or even all screens go in this category. That, take into the account whatever you can from on a play-by-play perspective to be able to kind of put those right buckets in place and approximate the best you can what they were asked to do on the play and how well did they do what they were asked to do.
Well, and I alluded to this earlier, Adam, one of the things that's really cool about the space and time that we're in right now is that there is so much technology with AI and the ability to kind of monitor even like body movements and stuff and track that sort of thing. So we can start moving in a direction where we can start creating some different types of stats where we can put these all in different buckets and can also track some things like Sumer. We track get off. We have sustain. Yeah. So we've got some different stats that we're working on. Can you tell us more about those?
Sure. So I mean, that's kind of getting to the point that Coach Wylie hit on earlier, where there's certain slices of the play where you may get a positive and certain slices where you may get a negative. So get off is more about how they're doing in the initial part of the play. Are they getting off and dropping into pass pro well? Or are they kind of preventing the possibility for pressure? And sustain is how long are they able to hold that? Certain guys are stronger in different categories, and you kind of want to give them credit, being able to hold a block for a long time, and give other guys credit or blame when they're not able to get off well. And hopefully that kind of slightly more nuanced slice of data can give coaches and evaluators a better sense of where a player is strong and where he could be need improvement a little bit.
When you pass blocking for the audience, it's the toughest thing to teach. It really is. There's so many. It's like a golf swing. There's so many parts to it. Okay, you know what I mean. But all you're looking for is to get a collision. If I can collision the guy, however I collision him, okay, and the quarterback's timing is correct, and the ball's gone. Okay, right? One blocking, they shuck you, they duke you, they run down the line, they go, they cross, they start running, twist on rundowns, and run blocking's actually tougher to do. It's actually tougher to run block that guy, right? Pass block is tougher to teach, okay, right? It's actually easier if you just get the collision the guy, okay? Yeah. Now, you'd like to get your outside eye and your inside hand low. You'd like to get them covered up. You like to get, you want to do all that, but get some type of collision in there, right? Make him go someplace he doesn't want to go. Okay, if he's running outside of you, it takes longer to get to the quarterback. If he's taking the inside route, it takes longer to get to the quarterback. Okay, the quickest way is to run right over the top of you to get to the quarterback. Okay, but that's going to take time too. Now you're going to grab the guy.
Hopefully.
If you can, some guys can't even do hand touch guys. You get that. Yeah, and that's not good. That's not good. When you can't do hand touch the guy, he's right in front of you. That's bad. You know what I mean? So those all figure into, the whole scheme of offensive line play. Okay, there's so many different. I'll use the term metrics, right, Adam, that you're familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, that has to go into, deciphering, and like I said earlier, in my little brain, I got to say, hey, they don't need this. They got enough stuff. They don't need all that stuff. This is okay for me. They don't need it. Okay.
Let me ask you a question that came up for me organically when we were trying to figure out on an earlier episode during the season last season who should make the Pro Bowl and who should make the All-Pro team. And we're trying to figure out who was the best of the best at each position. One of the things that came up for me at offensive line was how I should value or evaluate the difference between two types of offensive linemen. Someone who is maybe elite at one thing, maybe their pass rush, their pass blocking, grade or score, as we say at Sumer, where we have Sumer scores for all of these different positions that are based on tracking data. So maybe they're elite at one, either pass blocking or run blocking, but then maybe that person is average, good, not particularly impressive in the other area. And then you've got another guy who is very good, but not elite at either, but they're very good in both. Which one is more valuable to the offensive line?
So you're asking me or you're asking Adam?
I want to start with you, Bob.
Okay. To me, the guy that has the most is the most productive. Give me the guy that's the most productive. At the end of the day, okay, what's his efficiency? Okay, and the guy that he's responsible for. I want that guy. Give me that guy. Okay, so what's his efficiency? What's his, what kind of production does he give to you? How many times does it keep that guy from getting to that guy? It's all that matters. If we have to give him help with Aaron Donald, then we need to give him help. If we don't, all right, but what's his efficiency? What's his, and I'm sure, Adam, you got that. You have that someplace, okay? And I try to get that when I grade him. The kid gets a grade. What's his efficiency? How many times did he get his job done? Mm-hmm. Right? The more to get your job done, okay, the higher that, we better chance we have to win. I put it that way. You got to win. Everything's about winning. You got to win. I had a player come in my office one day and he sat down. He said, how do I make the team coach? I said, you got to win. He was a developmental guy. I said, you got to win. When you go out there, okay, and you go against the defense, because you're not going to be on the first team offensive line, okay, you're going to be on the team that services the defense. right? And you're going to win that against those guys. And if you go in one-on-one run blocking when we had that period, you're going to win, okay? And if you go to one-on-one pass blocking, you're going to win. You have to win, okay? Because when I sit in those personnel meetings, okay, I don't want to have to defend you. I mean, I do, okay, that's my job.
Yeah.
If we're doing it good or doing it bad, I got to tell them.
Let's not say your name.
Right. And I want the defensive guys. I want the defensive coordinator, the defensive line coach, and say, "Hey, Wiles, who's 63? He's choking the hell out of us." Okay. All right. I want those guys because when they say it, then all of a sudden, the personnel guy that's in charge of pro player personnel, his ears come up. The head coach, he starts listening. The owner, he starts getting more. Oh, well, the general manager, he gets in it. Okay. Because it's said by those guys, not by me. Okay. Yeah. That's how you're going to make the team. That's
So I think the stat we need to work on creating here is that Coach Wylie got his job done great. That's the type of stat that seems like we need to be producing somehow.
Yes. And, what says he? Because that's all at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. So we're putting a few meetings on your schedule, Bob, for later in the day, and we're gonna get this done. This has been really fun. I don't know that we specifically got to any answers that we can take away and say okay, I'm watching these things, but I think we did a good job of providing a lot of context around some things. And maybe if there is one thing that I want people to take away from this conversation more than any other, it's that the sacks and pressures are not wholly an offensive line stat. We just have to get away from that. We just have to. We know too much information now. And so if you take nothing else away, stop looking at the sack total and blaming the offensive line. Only partially. Bob Wylie, Adam Vonder Haar, thank you so much for your time. This has been really fun for me. And thank you so much to everybody listening. We'll be back again next week with another SumerSports show and edition of the Sticky Stats series.